All right, hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into a concept that's, well, a little bit ancient but super relevant, especially if you're prepping for the UPSC and, particularly if you've got international relations as your optional.
Definitely a concept with some staying power.
It is. We're talking about Plato's philosopher-king.
Ah, yes. The big question. Should philosophers rule? Always a fun one to unpack.
It is, it is. And I think for our listeners, it might seem a bit theoretical, like why are we talking about this ancient Greek philosopher? But trust me, it gets right to the heart of what makes for a good leader, just society, ideas that are still debated today, right?
Absolutely. It's a concept that's as relevant in the halls of the UN as it was in Plato's academy.
Yeah.
The ideal qualities of a leader, how power should be wielded. These are timeless questions.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, we've got like a whole stack of sources here.
Yeah.
Excerpts from Plato's Republic, of course. We've got to go to the source, but also criticisms, from folks like Aristotle, even some modern interpretations. So we're going to try to give everyone a really good overview of this whole debate.
Sounds good.
So let's just jump right into it. We're talking about a ruler with absolute power, right? That's the whole idea of the philosopher-king.
Right.
Which, can sound a bit, well, scary to a lot of people.
It can. I mean, absolute power, it's a tricky concept.
Yeah. But Plato, he had his reasons, right? Like he had this really specific vision of what a philosopher was and why they would actually be the best person for the job.
He did. He truly believed that philosophers were, well, they were uniquely equipped to rule justly. They were driven by this pursuit of truth, not by wealth, not by fame.
Right, not by those things that tend to, corrupt people, right?
Exactly. The sort of base desires. Plato argued they didn't really tempt the true philosopher. The philosopher was after something higher, something more, well, eternal.
So it's almost like he's imagining a leader who's immune to all those temptations. Things that trip up politicians in the real world. Someone whose only goal is the good of the state.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. A leader whose actions are guided by reason, by wisdom, by a genuine concern for the common good. That's the essence of Plato's vision.
Okay, so he's got this picture of the philosopher as this ideal leader.
He does.
But he also goes into some specifics, right? Like what qualities, what actual traits does this philosopher-king, what do they embody?
Oh, absolutely. He gets really specific. He talks about austerity, self-denial.
Like living a simple life kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Not indulging in luxury or excess. And he believed that these practices, they cultivated other important qualities like temperance, endurance, and ultimately selflessness.
So it's not just about being smart, it's about like a whole way of life, a whole way of being in the world.
Exactly. It's a commitment to living in accordance with reason, to putting the needs of the state above your own personal desires.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I mean, looking at the world today, right? Especially the world of international relations. I mean, it's messy, it's complicated. Selflessness doesn't exactly seem to be like the defining characteristic of most world leaders. You know what I mean?
Right. It's a fair point, and it's a point that many of Plato's critics have raised over the centuries, is this idea of the philosopher-king. Is it just too idealistic, too divorced from the realities of power and politics, especially on a global scale?
It is. I mean, that's a big question, right? I mean, can you really have someone who is that pure, that devoted to the good when there's so much, at stake, when there's so many different interests competing?
Yeah. It's a tough one. And even back in ancient Greece, not everyone was on board with Plato's vision. I mean, even his own student, Aristotle, had some pretty strong criticisms.
Right.
Oh, yeah. He argued that a state's strength actually lies in its diversity, not in, enforced unity under a single ruler. He thought that different people bring different skills, different perspectives to the table, and that a healthy state needs all of that, not just the wisdom of one super smart philosopher-king.
Which, when you think about international relations, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you've got so many different countries, different cultures, different, ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And that's what makes the whole idea of a single, all-knowing ruler, even a philosopher-king, it makes it seem, well, a little bit unrealistic.
It does. But I think even if we say, okay, maybe a philosopher-king isn't going to happen, isn't practical, the questions that Plato is raising, those are still like super important.
Absolutely. I mean, he's forcing us to think about about what we want from our leaders, about how power should be used, about the relationship between, knowledge and justice.
Yeah, it's like he's giving us this framework for thinking about power, about leadership in a way that's still relevant, even all these centuries later.
Exactly. And whether we agree with him or not, those are questions that anyone who wants to understand international relations, they have to wrestle with.
They do. They do. And even I think, for people who aren't, aspiring diplomats or whatever, like just thinking about these things, about what makes for a good leader, what makes for a just society. I mean, that's important for everyone.
It is. It's about being an informed citizen, about understanding how the world works, about being able to think critically about the systems that govern our lives.
Exactly. And that's part of what we're trying to do here, right?
Yeah.
To give people the tools, the ideas to engage with these big questions.
That's right. To help people, grapple with these complex issues, to think for themselves.
Yeah. And Plato, even if we don't agree with everything he says, he's a great starting point for that kind of conversation, that kind of thinking.
He is. He really is. He's one of those thinkers who, even when you disagree with him, he makes you sharper.
He does. He makes you think harder, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about, kind of Plato's vision, this ideal of the philosopher-king. But there were some pretty serious criticisms leveled against this idea, right?
Hmm.
Both back in his day and even in modern interpretations.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are some real challenges to the whole concept. I mean, one of the big ones is this idea that, even the wisest, the most virtuous person, they're still susceptible to the corrupting influence of power, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. Power, it can do strange things to people.
It can. It really can. And history is, well, it's full of examples of leaders who started out with good intentions, maybe even noble goals, but ended up, well, becoming tyrants.
Right, right. Which makes you wonder if Plato was being a bit naive, and
Yeah.
his belief in the inherent goodness of philosophers, or if maybe he was aiming for something a little bit more nuanced, like maybe he wasn't saying that this is literally how things should be, but more like this is an ideal to strive for, to think
Hey.
about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's something we should definitely explore further.
We should, because I mean the whole debate about what Plato really intended with this philosopher king, it gets pretty complex.
It does, and it's a debate that's still going on today.
Yeah.
There are some scholars who argue that the Republic, it wasn't meant to be taken literally.
Mhm.
Like Plato wasn't actually proposing that we, hand over the reins of power to a bunch of philosophers.
Right.
Yeah. They think he was being more subtle, more ironic maybe. Like he was using this idea of the philosopher king to actually critique idealism itself, to point out the inherent tension between a philosopher's life, which is all about contemplation, and the demands of ruling, which is all about action, about making tough decisions in a messy world.
So maybe we shouldn't be taking it so literally. Maybe the whole point is to make us think, to make us question, to make us grapple with these big ideas about leadership and the challenges of governing.
Exactly. And I think that's a really valuable way to approach Plato, to see him as someone who's pushing us to think harder, to question our assumptions, to really examine these fundamental concepts that shape our world.
He's definitely good for getting those brain juices flowing, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've established that the idea of the philosopher king is, well, it's complicated, it's controversial, it's sparked a lot of debate. But let's dig into some of the specific criticisms that have been leveled against it, both from back in Plato's time and from modern interpretations. I mean, one of the big ones, right, is that even the wisest individuals, they can be corrupted by power.
Right. That's a classic argument, and it's one that we see play out again and again throughout history.
It is. It is. It's
Yeah.
like power has this almost like magnetic pull.
Yeah,
It can distort even the best of intentions.
It can, and that's a real challenge for anyone who believes in good government, in ethical leadership, because it raises this question of whether anyone, no matter how wise or virtuous they might be at the start, can really resist that pull, that temptation that comes with having power.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if Plato was maybe being a bit too optimistic, in his faith in the inherent goodness of philosophers.
It does, it does. And it's a question that we're still grappling with today, Like how do we create systems of government, systems of international relations that can guard against that tendency for power to corrupt?
Right. Because, I mean, if even the wisest, the most virtuous can fall prey to that temptation, then what hope is there for the rest of us, you know?
It's a tough question, it really is. And I think it's one that forces us to think beyond just individual virtue, to think about the structures, the institutions, the checks and balances that we need to put in place to limit the potential for abuse, even from those who might start out with the best of intentions.
Yeah, it's like we need safeguards, right? We need systems that can keep power in check no matter who's wielding it.
Exactly, because the potential for corruption, it's always there, lurking in the background.
It is. And I think, looking at history, looking at the world today, I mean, we see that play out again and again.
We do, which is why, even though Plato's idea of the philosopher-king might seem, well, a bit far-fetched, a bit idealistic, the questions he's raising about power, about virtue, about the challenges of governing justly, those are still incredibly relevant.
They are. They are. And I think, for anyone who's interested in international relations, in politics, in just, understanding how the world works, those are questions worth grappling with.
Absolutely. And they're questions that we're going to continue to explore as we delve deeper into Plato's ideas and the criticisms that have been leveled against them. So, it's like, are we misreading Plato? Was he trying to tell us something else?
That's fascinating. So, like, not a literal blueprint, but more of a thought experiment.
Right. Like he's setting up this kind of extreme scenario, this philosopher king with absolute power, to make us think about the complexities, the potential pitfalls of even the most well-intentioned forms of rule.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So it's more about provoking, like, critical thinking,
Yeah.
rather than giving us, like, a concrete political program.
Exactly. And this interpretation, it gains even more weight when you look at Plato's later work, like
Yeah.
the Laws.
Oh, right, the laws. I always found that one a bit more down to earth, a bit more practical than the Republic.
It is. I mean, in the Laws, Plato, he kind of shifts away from this idea of a single all-powerful ruler, and he starts to talk more about systems, about laws, about a more kind of collaborative approach to governing.
Interesting. So he's not abandoning the idea of wise leadership, but he's recognizing that maybe it can't all rest on the shoulders of one person, no matter how brilliant they might be.
Right. Like even the wisest person, they need structures, they need institutions to guide them, to keep them accountable,
Yeah, that makes sense. And in the laws, what does he propose? Like, what's his alternative to the philosopher king?
Well, he introduces this idea of the nocturnal council.
The what?
The nocturnal council. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's this group of wise elders basically who are responsible for crafting and upholding the laws.
Okay. So it's like a collective body of wisdom rather than a single, all-knowing ruler.
Right, exactly. And they meet at night, which is kind of cool, right? Like they're deliberating under the cover of darkness, away from the hustle and bustle of everyday politics.
Huh. That's an interesting image. So it's like they're removed from the immediate pressures of governing, and they can take a more long-term view, a more kind of philosophical view.
Yeah, that's the idea. And this shift in Plato's thinking, it's pretty significant, I think, especially when you start to think about how it resonates with contemporary debates about power, about governance, about international relations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like we're still grappling with these same questions today, right? Like, how do we balance the need for strong leadership with the need for accountability, for checks and balances, for a diversity of perspectives.
Exactly. And Plato, even though he starts out with this very kind of idealized vision of the philosopher king, he seems to come to this recognition that even the best of intentions, they need to be supported by structures, by systems that can prevent the abuse of power.
Yeah. It's like he's realizing that human nature is well, it's fallible, right?
Yeah.
We need to create systems that can account for that, that can limit the potential for harm, even from those who might start out with the noblest of goals.
Right, right. And that's a really important lesson, I think, for anyone who's interested in leadership, in governance, in international relations. It's this idea that power, it needs to be constrained, it needs to be checked, it needs to be balanced.
Yeah. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely, right.
That's the saying, right?
Yeah.
And it's a saying that has a lot of truth to it, I think.
It does. It does. So Plato, even though he starts out with this vision of the philosopher king, he ends up in a more nuanced, more kind of realistic place, I think.
He does. And I think that journey, that evolution in his thinking, it's something that we can learn a lot from.
We can. And it's a journey that I think is still relevant for us today, as we try to figure out how to govern ourselves, how to manage power, how to create a more just and stable world.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the key takeaways from Plato's later work is that this idea of justice, it's not something that can be achieved by one person, no matter how wise or how virtuous they might be.
Right. It's more of a collective project.
Yeah.
Right. It's something that we need to work towards together.
Exactly. And it requires dialogue. It requires compromise. It requires a willingness to listen to different perspectives, to understand the needs and the interest of others.
And to recognize that no one person, no one group has a monopoly on truth.
Right. And that's a really important point, I think, especially in the context of international relations.
It is.
Yeah.
Because if we look at the world today, right? There's so much diversity, there's so much complexity. And to think that any one person, any one country, any one ideology could have all the answers, it's just not realistic.
It's not. And it's dangerous, I think, to think that way.
It is, because it leads to arrogance, it leads to intolerance, it leads to all sorts of problems.
Exactly. And I think, one of the things that Plato's later work really emphasizes is the importance of humility.
Humility. Interesting.
Yeah. Humility in the face of the complexity of the world, humility in the face of the limits of our own knowledge, humility in the face of the need to work together, to find common ground, to build a more just and a more peaceful world. It really is. And it makes you wonder, if Plato were alive today, how would he grapple with the complexities of the modern world?
Right. Would he still be advocating for this philosopher king, or would he have maybe revised his thinking a bit?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question to think about, Like how would Plato's ideas about leadership, about justice, how would they translate to a world that's so much more interconnected, so much more diverse, so much more, well, just plain complicated than the world he was living in.
Right. The world of ancient Greece, it was pretty small, pretty homogenous,
yeah,
compared to what we're dealing with today.
It was. And I think, one of the things that makes Plato so relevant, so worth studying is that even though he was writing, over 2,000 years ago, the questions he's asking, they're still the questions that we're struggling with today.
They are. The questions about power, about justice, about how we live together, how we govern ourselves. Those are timeless questions.
They are, and they're questions that are especially important for those of you who are preparing for the UPSC.
Yeah.
Because these are the kinds of questions that are going to come up in your essays, in your interviews. They're going to be at the heart of your understanding of international relations.
They are. So for our listeners who are on that path, who are working towards becoming, future diplomats, policymakers, what are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive into Plato's philosopher king?
Well, I think one of the big takeaways is that even though the idea a single, all-powerful, all-knowing ruler, it might seem kind of far-fetched, kind of unrealistic. The principles that Plato was grappling with, they're still incredibly relevant.
Right, right. Like the idea that leaders should be wise, they should be just, they should be motivated by the common good, not by their own selfish interests.
Exactly, exactly. And I think another key takeaway is this idea that even the wisest, the most virtuous people, they can be corrupted by power.
Right, right. That's a lesson that we see play out again and again throughout history.
We do.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lesson that's especially important to keep in mind in the context of international relations, where the stakes are so high, where the potential for abuse is so great.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, going back to Plato's later work, to the laws, I mean, I think one of the things that he's really emphasizing there is the importance of systems, of checks and balances, of having structures in place that can limit the potential for any one person to accumulate too much power.
Right, right. It's this idea that even the best of intentions, they need to be supported by institutions, by processes that can prevent the abuse of power.
Yeah, it's like we can't just rely on the virtue of individuals.
Right, right. We need more than that. We need safeguards. We need accountability mechanisms. We need to create a system where power is distributed, where it's checked, where it's balanced.
Exactly, exactly. Because as we've seen, I mean, power, it can be a very, very dangerous thing.
It really can. And I think, one of the most important things that we can learn from Plato is that we need to be vigilant. We need to be aware of the potential for power to corrupt, and we need to create systems that can mitigate that risk.
We do. And I think that's a lesson that's relevant not just for those who are aspiring to positions of power, but for all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, we all have a role to play in making sure that power is used responsibly, that it's used for the good of all.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, if we can take that lesson from Plato, if we can really internalize it, I think we'll be well on our way to creating a more just and a more peaceful world.
I agree. So for our listeners out there, I mean, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Plato's philosopher-king, if you found it thought-provoking, if you found it, helpful in your UPSC preparations, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the ideas that shape our world.
That's right. And for all of our UPSC aspirants out there, best of luck with your studies. And remember to keep those critical thinking skills sharp, those philosophical muscles flexed,
You got it. And until next time, happy studying, everyone.